Virginians pushing back on this culture that wants us to shelve hope, that tells our children they have to accept low standards, this culture that tells us that we, in fact, can't dream big dreams. No. This is a moment for Virginians to push back on this left, liberal, progressive agenda and take our Commonwealth back.
What bothers me to my core is what this man is doing. He's dividing parents against parents, parents against school boards. He's using your children as political pawns in his campaign. It is a racist dog whistle. Folks, we are better than that.
Yes, we are.
We will not have that hatred here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Those are the final arguments on the final day of campaigning in Virginia. It is a high-stakes race for governor with national implications. A flurry of new polling combined with reporting on the ground confirms what many of us have suspected for weeks. This contest between Democratic candidate Terry McAuliffe and Republican candidate Glenn Youngkin at this hour is on a knife's edge. The neck-and-neck nature of the race illustrated in polling averages. Youngkin on top just barely and well within the margins of error in every poll. Early voting has been going on for weeks in a race that's put the specter of Donald Trump up against inflamed worries in Virginia over exactly what's taught in school when it comes to race. New York Times summarizes it this way, quote, "It was clear in interviews with voters over the weekend, many Virginians view this election as something symbolically greater than a face-off between two candidates for governor. The contest has exposed the country's persistent divisions over questions of race, class, privilege, and the appropriate role of government, and become an outlet for Virginians to register their dissatisfaction with the political culture." Let's bring into our coverage Democratic pollster and MSNBC political analyst Cornell Belcher and Jason Johnson. Cornell, what do you think is going on here?
Wow. Well, I think there's a lot of variables acting here, but I do think look. Race has been a great mobilizer and energizer in American politics historically. I think Trump brought that home and made it more crystal clear to all of us. And you also see what Youngkin is doing right now in Virginia is actually part of the Trump continuum. I mean, his closing ad, Nicole, is about the schools in Virginia being overrun with violence and sort of the schools, you know, on the teetering on chaos. So it is this sort of scaring about the other and sort of attacking beloved, you know, Toni Morrison. It is this same sort of, you know, Trumpism, but, you know, sort of soft pedal of Trumpism, trying to sort of gin up a fear and anger and emotions, particularly among a white base of voters. It is very much what Trump did at the end of his campaign. When you remember, he said if he lost, the suburbs were going to be on fire. You know, trying to sort of gin up this fear and anxiousness among white suburban voters, particularly these white suburban voters who've been breaking more Democrat in the past, that they know they have to, in fact, win back. If this works, it is a blueprint for more of this sort of racial dog whistling, but sort of a softer peddling of it than Trump did at the national level. Though I think it will routinely be rejected by college-educated white voters who actually don't see their schools sort of violence and chaos breaking out all around them.
So, Jason, I watched Youngkin's event Saturday morning in, I think it's Old Town, Alexandria. I think part of the state that was broke very heavily for Biden. He was, it was a huge crowd. And the first thing he said, I think into a bullhorn or microphone, was, "On my first day, I will ban critical race theory." Why did he say that? Does critical race theory need to be banned? Is it taught in Virginia?
No, of course not. But here's the thing, Nicole, and this is something I say, and Cornell knows this as much, probably even better than I do. As a political scientist, I always pay attention to not just polling, but polling questions. Whenever I hear people say education has become the most important issue, it's not education. Right. Education is a proxy for people's racial animosities, okay? Nobody's freaking out about that. And one key thing about this, Nicole, is think about what we've done over the last year. Over the last year, most people have had children in their house taking virtual classes. So at some point when your kid was doing math class sitting in the middle of the kitchen table, you heard the teacher say white people are evil. I don't think anyone actually heard that. So unless critical race theory magically appeared the moment kids went back to class, it is a lie. It is just a proxy. But it's something that he can use to gin up a certain kind of voters. Now, I think what's important to understand I don't think there's anyone out there that's affected by these issues that didn't want to already be affected. Critical race theory, just like the caravan a couple years ago, just like in 2004 with, Susie has two mommies and parents were afraid that their children were going to be taught about the LGBTQ agenda. All of these things are not new. They're simply ways to gin up a certain group of people who are always ready to be angry. The issue has been whether or not Democrats in the state can demonstrate, hey, we have done enough to make you happy. Terry McAuliffe wasn't super popular when he got elected in 2013. I mean, he only won by like 2% of the vote, and there was a third party who won by 6. So he's not the strongest of candidates, and I don't know. I've said very clearly, I don't know how this race goes. I don't think it'll necessarily be something that can be transferred if Youngkin ends up winning, because you don't have that many Republicans out there who can pretend they're not excruciatingly racist long enough to actually win a presidential campaign or a governor's race.
Yeah, I want to press both of you on something that everyone has sort of accepted, including myself, that this race is totally nationalized. I want to probe that a little bit with both of you. If I can ask you to stay over a quick break, we'll be right back with Jason and Cornell. We're back with Cornell and Jason, two people who know a lot about politics. I want to just push you, Cornell, on this idea that it's totally a nationalized referendum on Trump insurrection and Biden's ability to get his agenda through. It seems to me, when we talk to people in the state, that there's a little bit more going on here.
Well, there's a lot going on, and look, there's not one variable, but I will say this, right, Nicole, and my friend Jason, is that we use the term bellwether far too often in politics. That said, Virginia is kind of a bellwether, and why I say that is off-year elections, and YouTube political hacks know this well. Off-year elections are really, quite frankly, about getting your turnout out, getting your base fired up. And what I would say to you is Youngkin and Republicans are crazy like foxes. Critical race theory in school. Your white kids are being taught to sort of self-hate or hate their whiteness. Trump and the big lie, your country's being taken away from you, elections are being stolen. You got to take back your country. Like Youngkin said, we got to take back Virginia. All this is aimed at ginning up energy among his Republican base. What are Democrats giving their base of voters to be energized and mobilized around? We're going to give you bridges and roads, maybe? So I do think this is a sort of a bellwether. And look, if the polling, throw the polling out the window, because you also remember Northam, actually, when Northam got more votes than anyone in the history of a governor's race in Virginia, right, won. The polling average was about 2%. It was a tight race there too. This is all about what the electorate looks like on Election Day. And if you tell me that on Election Day that 22% of the electorate is African American, that 56% of that electorate is college educated, if 43% of that electorate is under 45, I'm going to say that Democrats, in fact, did turn out and they were mobilized, and Terry McAuliffe is going to have a good evening. If those things don't happen, I think you're going to have Terry McAuliffe having a difficult evening, but I also think that means something for Democrats going into the midterm. If we lose Virginia, I'm sorry, it's time to hit the panic button, because after Virginia, it's the deluge.
Yeah, and to maybe re-examine the priorities. I want to read you this, Jason Johnson in Politico. Last-ditch fight for black votes could swing Virginia. The focus on black voters in the final stretch of the campaign illustrates the critical role they'll play on Tuesday. Not only did McAuliffe win a prior term as governor with the overwhelming support of black voters, especially black women, every national election since then has proved how critical they are to Democratic chances of victory in close races. While some involved in Virginia have taken heart in a late upswing in energy, others stress that black voters are exhausted from the fight against Donald Trump and frustrated with the lack of progress in Washington. We cover the fight for federal voting rights legislation every single day. And do you know what black swing voters are called in those stories? Activists. Why are the activists courted ahead of a close election, but the activist priorities ignored during the regular course of business?
I would ask that question of Jamie Harrison and the Democratic Party as a whole. Because that's part of the problem here. Like black people ain't here to save this country, right? we have never been, regardless of what kind of op-eds or questions that people write. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to actually live and breathe and have our lives like everybody else. And so I tend to find these kinds of articles and that sort of theme that always pops up at the last minute. I find it almost low-key insulting because the entire onus of keeping this country functional is put on a group of people people who haven't received 40% of the benefits that this place supposedly has as advertised. But that aside, I'll say this, Nicole, you can't galvanize any of your constituents 48 hours before an election. You got to have those people excited all along. Look, former President Obama's been there. Stacey Abrams has been there. I know lots of people have been there campaigning. But what this is going to boil down to is not just, as Cornell mentioned, as you've mentioned, Nicole, it's not just national issues. It's the feeling within the state that they are moving forward in a proper way. I am actually less concerned about what happens with Youngkin and McAuliffe, because I don't think McAuliffe is the strongest of candidates, than I am about the fact that the Virginia House, the Democrats have like a 6-seat lead. If they lose that, like if they lose the House as well, that is a very dangerous sign for Democrats, because that means by 2024, right? Because they don't have their next election until 2025, you could see some shenanigans end up happening when it comes to electoral votes and the presidential election. So that is actually what I am paying attention to. Can they hold the top of the ticket, and can they also hold parts of the House so that you don't have issues when we come to national elections?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. I asked Jamie Harrison about this, and he didn't seem that concerned. But what if it's close, McAuliffe wins, and Youngkin takes a page out of Trump's playbook and doesn't concede? Cornell?
Well,
go ahead, Jason.
Go ahead, Jason. You take it.
But yeah, that's perfectly possible. It's perfectly possible.
It's possible.
Like I wouldn't put it past Youngkin at this point.
But it's just a new thing to watch and worry about. What do you think, Cornell?
Well, look, I do think Virginia is a changing state. I mean, I'm a Virginian. I grew up down in Tidewater and Norfolk, and it was solidly Republican state. But demographic shifts are happening, and that anxiety there that we see nationally is also happening in parts of Virginia. Look, you know, Barack Obama he only got 37% of the white vote there. Terry McAuliffe lost white voters there by I think 30 points last time around. So there is this sort of racial angst sort of underlying it, and sort of, you know, they're in the state, but big parts of it, sort of Northern Virginia, you know, the ring counties around Richmond, as well as down there in Tidewater, sort of these college-educated, more suburban voters who have been breaking more Democrat, have been sort of, you know, holding Virginia up. But I will also sort of change the narrative here. Republicans will not have a better chance in the next decade of winning Virginia. Historically, they're supposed to do well historically now. They're supposed to do really well historically now. All the measurements, all the history says Republicans do well now. If Youngkin fails to win Virginia, given the sort of different kind of campaign he's tried to run and try to walk that thin line, if he loses Virginia right now, I think it's a devastating blow to Republicans, because they're not going to have a better chance in the next decade of winning this state than they do right now.
We'll be watching. Cornell Velter, Jason Johnson. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I just want to add real quick. Also, because this election is being done with the old census information, by the time the new census information comes up, Virginia is completely blue. So Cornell's completely right. This is the only chance that Republicans are going to have, because Northern Virginia is going to be 70% of the state by the time they do the new numbers.
You guys have more information than we have time for. Thank you so much for being part of our coverage.